Okay, every time I do a tutorial, I just have the need to say that this is only my way of doing it, but it's also the right way. And it's also the only way. So today I'm gonna talk about the thing that beginners have the most problems with: lines. I have a whole presentation prepared for you, and it's gonna take me some time to cover it, and we're gonna start very basic and then we're gonna get advanced. But if you're not a patient person, this is probably not the best video for you. So as I've told you before, I'm not a fucking teacher, okay? I've never been to any type of school. I don't have a degree or nothing, but I've been coaching people on how to paint for over a year now, and them motherfuckers is getting good. So this is my Patreon Alexis, and this is her progress in only 6 months. So if you go to her Instagram, Alexis as usual, and you scroll down, you're gonna see all her old shitty work back from January. What the fuck is this shit? So this was her work before working with me, right? And that's the generic type of stuff that I see from all beginners. Just doing a bunch of characters, doing a bunch of color. And beginners usually have the tendency to do this shit, where they both shade and sketch at the same time, and they don't know how to do either, and they end up with this weird mix of the two. That would be like you trying to learn how to fight, but every time you go to fight, you just randomly throw both your arms and legs in the air like, "Come at me, bitch!" Yeah, I don't think you're really gonna hurt anybody with that. I mean, besides yourself. So that's why I have this whole philosophy that the fastest way to get better at drawing is just to learn things separately rather than just randomly throwing your hands in the air. And the first and most important thing that you need to learn about is lines. And actually, let's talk about what is even a line. I know this sounds like some real kindergarten shit, but you'd be surprised. So the purpose of a line in drawing, or actually I should say realistic drawing, because you might be doing some weird ass fucking style and I can't really help you with that. So the purpose of a line in drawing is to convey form. So you look at 3D objects and then you transform them into a 2D surface. The problem with that is that one is 3D and the other is 2D, aka it doesn't really fit. So humans have developed this tool called a pencil to help you capture the illusion of form. So let's say that you just want to draw a simple cube. If you've graduated from middle school, which I hope you did, you know how to just connect these lines and create the form of a cube. But you tell a little kid to draw a cube, and he's just gonna draw a fucking square. That's because little kids don't think about form and shit, because they're too busy drawing the houses with chimneys and smiling suns. So adults understand the idea of form when it comes to a cube, but you tell them to draw a face, and all of a sudden they're gonna draw 2 circles, the letter C, and this weird shape with a bunch of teeth in it. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but right now, you're like the little kids with the smiling sun. So the same way that a kid draws the symbol of a cube rather than the actual 3D form of a cube, you draw the symbol of a face rather than the actual form of a 3D head. And if you look at Alexis's old work, that's exactly what it is. A bunch of lines that symbolize a face. So what a line is supposed to represent in realistic drawing is the separation of those planes and forms rather than just the symbol of those forms. The problem is that if you've been drawing for a long time, the idea of structure and form is so deep in you that even if you draw some simple lines, you're still conveying the form. And beginners look at that and they're just thinking, oh, I just have to copy that and I'm gonna get the same results. But again, what happens if you try to copy somebody who's a black belt in karate? You just throw your hands in the air like a fucking moron. And I've already done a video on exactly what exercises and why you need to be doing them in order to learn portrait drawing. So go watch that later so I don't repeat myself for 100 times. And I'm not saying that the lay-in is the best and the only way to learn this shit, even though that's exactly what I said in the beginning of the video. But the lay-in is just a tool that's gonna help you to start seeing in 3D and understand basic lines rather than doing this weird combination of shading and flapping hands. Now if we look through Alexis's first try of the lay-in, they're fucking horrible. They're completely flat, the lines are awful, and this is the weird evolution of an alien. So it takes some time of you doing this exercise for you to start seeing the head in 3D. And this time is a great opportunity for you to work on your lines. Because up until now, you were able to hide your horrible lines with this weird shading, but remove the shading, and you're left with your kindergarten lines. Now this is Alexis's work today, 6 months later, and you can see how much her lines have improved. And something that a lot of people don't understand is that your lines are really gonna be the foundation of your painting. So the lines need to almost be a map of where the shading is gonna be. But if you're not able to convey the form through your lines, no amount of shading is gonna help you. A lot of people have this super shitty line art and they think that they can fix it later with the rendering, but that's only gonna waste you a lot of time and it's gonna end up making everything messy. What you wanna do is first learn how to create good line art and then learn how to shade. Don't mix the two, because again, you know the flapping hands. So what makes line art look good? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's three core things: proportions, structure, and line weight. Now the first two exercises that I showed you in the tutorial teach you about proportion and structure, and the third exercise teaches you about the line weight. And even though the third exercise is only about getting your lines better, that doesn't mean that in the first exercises you shouldn't have good lines. As I said, I really believe in you studying one thing at a time, but lines and proportions are always going to be a part of your drawing. So you don't need to perfect them, you just need to get them good enough so you can get to the next step. So in the first two exercises, you need to practice having your lines clean and strong. Again, they don't need to be perfect, but from what I've seen from people who have never done these exercises, their lines are just... So now let's talk about line principles and where to start. First and most important thing is your brush settings. People who say all brushes don't matter are either professionals who've been drawing for 10 years and for them brushes really don't matter, or they're delusional beginners who don't know what the fuck they're talking about. The most important thing that your sketch brush needs to have is what I call build-up. That means that if I press lightly, I get a lighter and smaller line, but if I press harder, I get a bigger and darker line. But even if I press the hardest, I still don't get 100% black, and that allows you to stack your brush strokes and actually build what's called line weight. Now that shouldn't be confused with opacity or flow. I always have that on 100%, and you shouldn't touch that. It's all in the brush settings. So you go to Window, Brush Settings, and you make sure that you have Shape Dynamics and Transfer turned on, and everything is at 0% and pen pressure. Now I've done these screenshots on how to set up your brush settings on both Procreate and Photoshop. So pause this video right here if you want to copy them, and those settings are purely for my sketching brush, not for shading. Now the brush that I use for sketching is this triangular brush, and I like it because it gives you these very sharp corners and it reminds me of a pencil. I don't like using the standard round brush because it makes everything look very digital. And you can download all of my brushes for free on my website aganef.com/brushes. Also, if you use Photoshop, I've included my two presets. So you just import the tools and then you just click on my sketch brush and everything is set up. So you don't have to do any stupid shit. Okay, now that we have the brush and the brush settings, let's talk about how to actually draw. I can't believe I'm talking about this, but I see very small amount of people actually doing this. So when you're drawing, you never draw like that from the wrist because the arc of the motion is much smaller and there's a bigger chance that you're gonna do a wavy line. You also don't draw from the elbow like that. It's a little bit better than the wrist, but it's used for something else. What you want to do is draw from the motherfucking shoulder. So you lock your elbow, you lock your wrist, and then you move only your shoulder. Now if you've never done this before, it's gonna be awkward as fuck. But do you want good lines or not? Then shut the fuck up. So if I'm doing any sort of details, I might do this motion, but in general I'm always working from the shoulder and the whole arm is locked, even for small things like circles, especially if you're just starting out the sketch. Then we have how to hold the stylus. Now this is not fucking school and this is not a fucking pen. So you don't hold it at an angle like that because you're not fucking writing, but you hold it upright like this and you do this motion, because again this gives you a lot more control. This is how it looks from the side, and again it's a lot more upright than how most people do it. I'd also recommend you to buy one of these gloves that helps your hand glide on top of the tablet and it doesn't make it all oily and shit. Just search on eBay drawing glove. It's $1 and it's very useful. It also kind of looks like a condom. Then we have pressing lightly first and tablet settings. So again, when you're using the sketching brush, you want to be able to create these sort of lines very light and small, and then these sort of lines very dark and bold without changing any sort of settings. So if you press very lightly and you're not able to produce this sort of a stroke, or you press hard and you're not able to produce this stroke, you go to your tablet settings and then you find this thing, tip feel. Of course, it depends on what type of a tablet you have, but all of them are gonna have these settings. So you need to find the slider and see if you need to make it more firm or more soft. So when I'm drawing, I always start out with these very faded brush strokes, and only when I'm sure of something and I know that's exactly where it's supposed to be, do I go on top and actually repeat it and make my lines bolder. I see a lot of people start out their sketch, they're literally using lines like this. Like, bitch, how do you even know that's supposed to be there? And the secret to beautiful lines is really the build-up. So if you look at this line, which was made with like an ink brush that has no sort of a build, you can see how harsh it is. And then this one made by my sketch brush, you can see how soft it is on the end, but right here in the middle, it's dark and bold. And this sort of a line is not made with just doing it once. Like, you need to go on top and actually repeat your line in order to create this smooth and silky look. So again, you start out very lightly, just finding out the proportions, keeping it clean, and then you go on top on the same layer and you build up and repeat your lines. Bro, do you realize if I was teaching kindergarten kids, I'll be beating them by now. Then we have how to erase. And a lot of people think that the eraser is only for like correcting mistakes, but it can be used for a lot of different things. The first and most important thing that I use the eraser for is really fading out my lines. So I make the eraser much bigger than it's supposed to be, and I go very lightly on top, pressing multiple times to create this sort of a gradient. Another thing that I use the eraser for is sculpting. So let's say that I was trying to create a triangle. I might make this brush stroke and then just sculpt it out into the shape that I was looking for, rather than creating it with all these small brush strokes and then end up with something very messy. So whatever you're drawing, always draw it with the least amount of lines that you need, because the more lines you have, the messier it's gonna look. Also, I think some people still have this stigma of using the Control Z. It makes absolutely no fucking sense. The undo is the most useful thing in digital painting because it allows you to make 10 different lines and choose the most perfect one. It's not cheating, you just get better at lines. Then we have changing your brush size. Now I think a lot of people have this obsession with the brush size number and they're always looking at it and it's like 35? Should I be using 45? Bro, who cares about the fucking number? It's about how it looks. I would advise you to always make your sketch brush bigger, so that way it's gonna force you to press lighter in order to create smaller brush strokes. Because if your brush is way too small, you're gonna be forced to press harder in order to even see your lines, and then you're gonna end up with these very inky and analytical lines rather than the smooth and gentle lines. I have actually changed the brush size shortcuts to A and F. So if I press A, my brush gets smaller. If I press F, it gets bigger, and I'm constantly changing it. Like, I don't just change it once and then I'm like, I think I'm done. So when I first start out, I'm using a bigger brush, pressing very lightly, just finding proportions. And then when I'm sure of something, I make my brush smaller and press a lot harder in order to create these very small and dark lines. And it's also very important to have a lot of confidence with doing lines. So I'm not just doing it very slowly, trying to create like the perfect line, because that's exactly how you end up with all these weird waves. You just find where the line is supposed to be and you just do it one time very confident. If you have your Control Z, but you make sure that you have a good line. It's much better to work slower and have fewer cleaner lines rather than work very fast but end up with all these weird scratches. Finally, we have line exercises. First, we have circles and ovals, and it's literally you just sit down and you fill out pages and pages of just circles and ovals. Even if they look like potatoes, you just keep going. Then we have parallel lines. You need to be able to create these very long and clean lines. Even better if you're able to leave the same distance between each line, because that really teaches your eye. And you change the direction and keep going. Up, down, sideways, up ways. Then the third one is connecting dots. So you create two dots and you just try to create them with a perfect line. If you can't, just Control Z until you can. And of course, you know, you start out with dots that are closer to each other because those are going to be easier, and then you just try out some longer ones, and it actually did it. So this really teaches you how to be more precise, and one thing that can help you is just ghosting the line first. So I'll just go from one dot to the next, and then I'll actually do the line. And finally, we have repeating lines. So you draw one line and then you just keep going on top as many times as you can without going outside. If you go outside, you just Control Z that bitch and you just keep going. So I know this might look like a lot, you know, 10 minutes for each exercise. That's 40 minutes if you're just doing fucking lines. But one thing you have to realize is that drawing heads or whatever else it is, it has very little to do with having good lines. So if you want your lines to get better, you need to focus only on the lines, because if you're drawing a head, you're so worried about proportions and whatever else that you don't really think about, am I really creating good lines? And I would advise you to do these exercises every single day, especially before you start drawing. So play some music, podcast, porn, whatever the fuck it is, and just draw a bunch of lines. Now that we talked about how your lines are supposed to look, let's go to some of my patrons and show you how your lines are not supposed to look, because I've seen some fucked up shit. But whatever I say, please don't unsubscribe from my Patreon, because I'm gonna be homeless. First, we have chalk lines. Now, even if your lines are clean and you have all of the rhythm lines of the lay-in, you can see how when there's no build-up, your lines just look flat. So that's the reason why your brush needs to have a build-up, and you need to start out very soft and gentle and build it up into these hard and darker lines, so you can actually end up with something that looks 3D rather than flat like a pancake. Then we have the standard beginner lines. These are the ones that I see most often from beginners when they start out. They were done with a round brush, and you can see how this person didn't think about build up at all. So even if you have clear and right lines, they still look like they were drawn by a kid. Then we have the not build up lines, and at least this person uses the right brush, but you can see how they're still not developed and they look very wishy-washy. This might be a great start to a sketch, but after you're sure of your proportions and you know exactly where everything is supposed to be, you need to go on top and actually repeat your lines. Then we have rough lines. Now this is what happens when you didn't set up the tablet settings that I showed you. So this person is literally not capable of creating these very light and gentle lines. So all of his brush strokes look very rough, and when he adds a couple of them on top of each other, they look messy. And then we have erased lines. This is what happens when you do multiple lines but you're not sure of them, so use the eraser, just kind of clean them up, but you end up with these very choppy lines. Instead, you need to try to do them with one line, and if you don't like it, you Control Z it and you build it up very slowly. But on the other side though, we have soft and ghost lines, which is what happens if you don't use the eraser enough. So you end up with all these very messy and ghosty lines on the side. Then we have over analytical lines. Every once in a while it will happen where people are so worried about getting their lines look good that they'll try to make them perfect and they will end up looking flat. If you forget that this is actually a drawing and you try to make every single line absolutely perfect, it's gonna end up looking like a robot did it, and that's not good either. And I know it might seem like I don't like anybody's lines, but there's definitely one or two people that got it. So this is how your lines are supposed to look. See how they're actually built up with lines on top of each other, but they're very clean. Also notice how this person didn't repeat the lines that are not going to be important. So there's no sense in you repeating this circle because it's going to be behind everything. Rather, you should repeat only the lines which are going to be overlapping the other ones. And here I wanted to show you the progress of my patron Curry Ross. He signed up with me on May, and you can see that his lines were clean, but they had no sense of 3D form and no sense of line weight. So it's very possible to get your lines good quick, but you need to really do a lot of line exercises, a lot of circles, a lot of lay-ins, and then really focus on doing the build-up and actually repeating your lines over and over again. And also you have to realize how much practice is actually gonna take. I think this person was practicing like 3 hours every single day of doing all these exercises, and I fucking hate when people just do one example when they're like, am I ready for the next step? No, bitch, you're not. If you're not sure if you're ready for the next step, then you're probably not. So now let's talk about what is line weight and how do you get that shit. In the most simple of terms, line weight is what actually makes line look good. So if you look at this drawing by Oliver Sin, he's really good at sketching. You can kind of see how he didn't use the same lines everywhere. For example, this jaw started out very dark and heavy right here in the chin, and then it gets lighter until you can barely see it, and then it's back to being heavy right here in the ear. So line weight is understanding where to make your lines darker and where to fade them out. So anywhere where there's a soft transition in the planes, for example, right here, he knows that the jaw going into the neck is gonna be a very soft edge, so he uses a very soft and very light brush stroke. But anywhere where there's gonna be a hard edge, or for example an outline like right here in the chin, you need to make the line much darker and you need to build it up much more in order to show the hard transition. Another place where you need to make your lines a lot darker is everywhere where there's gonna be a shadow. So for example, if you look at that wing of the nose, right on the bottom of the wing, it's gonna be much darker because it's gonna be in shadow. But above in here, that's gonna be in light. So if you make that line dark, it's just not gonna look like it belongs there. Another great use of line weight in this drawing is, for example, right here on the bridge of the nose, there's a very hard and dark line because that's gonna be a very hard transition from the eye to the nose, and you need to show that those two are separate. But up here in the eyebrow, that's a very soft transition going from the eyebrow to whatever the fuck you call this, so there's gonna be a very light and gentle line. A common mistake that people do is thinking that line weight is just making your lines bolder. But if you make all of your lines bolder, then they're still gonna look flat. If you look at this work by my patron John, you can see how it still looks kind of faded, but it looks very 3D and built up. And the reason for that is because the weight of the lines is different everywhere. So if you look at the corner of the mouth right here, it has a much different intensity than the corner of the lip itself. So for example, if we take this very analytical sketch and we look at the lips, I add more weight right here into the corners, into the middle, everywhere where there's supposed to be a shadow, like the bottom as well. And then everywhere where there's gonna be a soft transition, for example, right here in the corner of the lips themselves, you just fade out that line and you can see that immediately looks a lot more 3D. So if you have two lines like this and you add more darkness everywhere, that's not necessarily line weight. It's much better to build up the lines only here in the corner and make sure that they have different amount of line weight everywhere. So in the corner, they're gonna be more bold and dark, and then as they get closer to the edge, they're gonna get lighter and smaller. So usually when a complete beginner sees the jaw, he just draws it with one curve. Then the next stage is you really understanding that there's gonna be planes there and you draw it with two different lines. And then the next stage after that is getting those two lines and really building up line weight so it actually looks a lot more 3D. So first you need to get out of the step of you only drawing symbols and actually understand that there's gonna be different planes and learn how to create clean lines. And then after the planes, you learn how you can actually add more weight into that without losing the planes. Because if you just draw a curve like this and you add a weight everywhere, you actually go back to just having no form at all. So this stage you keep everything very clean, you use a lot of the Control Z until you master just having good brush strokes, and then you learn about how you can actually build more weight, and then you use the eraser to actually sculpt out your brush stroke. So this is it, man. You can have crazy results in 6 months, but you gotta focus on one step at a time and know exactly what you're learning. I also made this free PDF for you which covers everything that I talked about, all the different steps with images and text, and you can download that for free from the description. Also, if you're interested in these exercises, I have longer videos on my Patreon which cover every single one, and they show you in real time exactly what you need to do. So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/angelgannet. So this is it, man. I hope this was useful. You know, I don't really want to do any random tutorials that are not a part of something bigger, but you know, I also said that about how to draw videos, so I don't know. I'm gonna fuck you up, bitch!